ToK presentation. Mine is going to be on memory and emotions. So my real life situation deals with mainly memory with Elizabeth Loftus, and some of you have heard of her from psychology, where you had to study memory. What Elizabeth Loftus, she is one of the leading scientists of memory, and something that she does often to several subjects at different times is the reconstruction of automobile deconstruction. And that's where she takes either an image or a video and shows it to a person, if it's a video that's playing and they see it, and has them attempt to commit it to memory. Then she just asks them random questions about the video, and then she asks how fast the car was going when it crashed. She changes the words crashed for traveled, bumped, smashed, and depending on the word change, that also results in a change of speed. In other examples of this, with the picture, she would have a picture and again ask random questions about the picture and ask the person to describe the scene from memory. Times the person can state that there was a cracked windshield when there isn't, and that there's glass scattered on the ground. And that would be the emotional part of this. My knowledge question is, to what extent can memory be manipulated by emotions, which is what we can see with the real-life situation. Okay, so my first real-life application is from what happened with the events of 9/11. How people believed that everyone who was Islamic was evil and would attack everyone. Where I got this from is from the book 3 Cups of Tea. How when the author had returned from Pakistan, he was greeted with an explosion of flags and patriotism after New York was bombed. And the question that comes from this is, how does cultural bias influence memory? Well, cultural bias in itself depends upon not only the time period, but events that also happened around a certain area, such as we can say that there's cultural bias in Missouri for what happened with Ferguson, being the bias that there's racism. And that can also be said for media as well. And the influence upon memory is, as we had discussed about the 3 shootings that had happened with Trayvon Martin, Ferguson, and Baltimore, the bias is that whenever someone gets injured or killed in an event involving a police officer and a civilian, if that person has a darker skin tone, such as if we refer to him or her as black, even though that's a bit derogatory, the bias is that that person was shot, even though that is not what happened in Baltimore. My second real-life application is that people can be manipulated into believing that they have committed a crime, including having false memories of it. This was a recent study that was done with teenagers and young children, young adults between the ages of 11 and 14 who had no real contact with the police, and they hadn't done anything wrong. Of the 60 subjects, half of them were made to believe that they had committed a very traumatizing crime, and the other half were made to believe that they were a part of that and that they were traumatized and that the memory was repressed. How they did it was they took these boys to a station and they questioned them on whether or not they did any of this, and they took what appeared to be real recollections from family members and told them to the boys. They did this by interspicing what was already known, that the boys had already remembered and knew from what the family had told them, to what was false. Of the boys who were considered to be part of the ones that caused the crime, 71% believed that they had committed the crime with false memories, and of the ones who were made to believe that they were traumatized, 77% had believed that with false memories. So this begs the question, how does guilt affect memory? And guilt in this case is an emotion. So guilt affects memory in many different ways, memory being that it can make something last. If you are guilty, then you will feel just abashed sadness over whatever it is. Sadness is not the proper term. And because of that, then the memory will linger. The memory will feel more real. Post-traumatic stress disorder. With the article that we had read by Kat McGowan over whether or not your brain is lying to you, with post-traumatic stress disorder, what happens is an event that is usually maladaptive, such as a car crash, World War II for the survivors of the Holocaust, the events in Iraq right now, any of those could be considered post-traumatic disorder if it affects a person. So why do emotions manipulate memory? Because post-traumatic stress disorder is from these emotions. It's caused because the emotions keep the memory recurring, then it causes anxiety and everything else. Emotions manipulate memory because that is how memory is remembered. You don't remember what you had for breakfast this morning because you didn't have a real event to it. Were you happy this morning? Were you sad? Were you just tired? If you had an overwhelming amount of feeling sad or tired, no, not tired, sorry, feeling sad or angry or happy or elated, then you would remember that memory more, such as why we are able to remember events such as going to Disney World for the first time, or the first time a parent or grandparent died. And so the claim that I'm trying to make here is that emotions manipulate memory heavily. However, there are some instances where that does not happen. That is true. An instance of this is the Casey Anthony trial, and I don't know if you all remember this really because we were like in elementary, middle school at this time. But with the trial, what happened was Kaylee Anthony, Casey's daughter, went missing. She ended up being found dead. Now, how Casey Anthony refers to it, or how Casey Anthony is in all of this cycle of my presentation, is that she had no emotions when she was being put on trial. She didn't even report her daughter missing until 2 days after the fact. So this brings to the question about the legal system, and Casey Anthony's trial brought out a whole many more questions when referring to Trayvon Martin because the state had to change things from what they did to this trial. Now, the question is, how substantial are memories to the judicial court system? They are substantial in that, no, we don't consider people to recall their memories, but eyewitness reports require them. With Casey Anthony's trial, we had used scientific evidence that Kaylee had died, that she was duct taped, that she was placed in Casey's car for some period of time. We know that because with the air quality, it was that the body was decaying. At least some kind of body was. Now, with the memories being for the judicial court system, we need eyewitness reports, such as what was Casey doing? Casey was out partying. What were her grandparents doing? They were at their house and they were worried. Now, I'm not going to bring in my point of view over whether Casey was guilty or not. I'm not going to do that. That's not what this presentation is about. But memories are far more important to the court system than we choose to relay them as, because we consider science to be more important, but we don't focus on that. If we then go from this to the events of Ferguson, then it's that the the policing system that Ferguson had failed because they did not get eyewitness reports of what happened, and that is why the policeman who shot the other man was set free. Now, there are also some eyewitness reports that claim to be guys free but are not, such as what we have seen in Ferguson. This brings up the question, how does memory manipulation affect history? To the victor, the spoils. That is what we have heard, such as with how we are studying the Civil War. how we are studying the Civil War, we are led to believe that slavery is morally wrong and that the Union was fighting for slavery to have everyone free. That is not the case as we have learned. The case was that Lincoln was just trying to keep the Union together, not to end slavery. Okay, Walter and Margaret Keene. For those of you who don't know, Tim Burton's, one of his recent movies, Big Eyes, focuses on them. Walter and Margaret Keene were actual people who lived in the 1950s. Margaret is still alive. Walter died in 2007. And what Margaret did for a living was she painted these pictures with large eyes. Because she painted them in the 1950s, she was not considered to be a proper artist because she was a woman. Walter, however, saw her paintings, then he married her and placed his name upon them, thus making them his. Now, how is memory influenced by culture? The culture in this case is that it's the time period, it being the 1950s, women were not credible for doing anything. And for my conclusion, memory is manipulated through emotions in ways such as how a memory is formed with how it is remembered in the events of the that are going on and the person's emotional state. With the court system, memory is vastly important. It is that what most trials are based upon, not if there is scientific evidence that this happened, because we do not have that all the time. What we have more than scientific evidence is we have eyewitness reports. What this presentation itself can show to people of importance is that memory needs to be fixed in some kind of way, because we can manipulate it emotionally. If we just fix the emotions that were behind the memory, then we could get rid of things such as phobias, and that would help a whole bunch of people.